Bom dia. My name is Anna and I'm a Ukrainian. A year ago, I would never begin my lecture with an introduction to the fact that I'm Ukrainian. It is important, but it has never been so important for me to say it in the very first sentence. But now, as Russian war in Ukraine continues, I think it's important to tell you that I'm Ukrainian and what comes together with that. I think that one of the first questions that people ask Ukrainians is, did we believe that full-scale war is possible? And if you ask me that question, I will answer you with 100% confidence. I did not believe that full-scale war is possible in the 21st century in the center of Europe with no particular reason. There were lots of news about possible Russian attack. We lived in a state of war with them since 2014. We were prepared that some active military movements can take place close to the zone of NATO. But we did not believe full-scale war is possible, despite all the warnings from the United States, the United Kingdom, various intelligence services, and so on. So for me, the 24th of February began with the feeling that it cannot be happening. And I received a telephone call with just a phrase, it all began. And then I opened my Facebook, turned on the news, and I saw things happening in different cities of Ukraine. It did not happen on the borderline with Russia, where we had this war for 8 years. It was everywhere, including the capital. After I've learned this news, 20 minutes later, I've heard explosions in my own city, which is located in the west of Ukraine and is considered now a semi-dangerous zone because we don't have Russian tanks and Russian soldiers. We rarely have missile attacks and can continue our work and life to a more or less normal degree. Normal degree, why? Because you cannot be happy when war is happening in your country, and many people from my city and my region fight, lose their relatives, lose their jobs, lose their lives, whether directly or metaphorically. So when it all began and you hear explosions on your local airport, you cannot believe this is happening. Because once again, it is the 21st century, it is the center of Europe. You are a big and independent country. You did nothing wrong, you did not provoke, you did not demonstrate any aggression towards your neighbors, and your only problem is that Russia believes that you are a part of their country. You know, somehow I'm always surprised by the fact that Ukraine can imagine its life pretty well without Russia, and Russia, especially this idea of Russian Empire, is impossible without Ukraine. And today we fight for our independence once again. I'm sure many of you remember the times of the USSR, and this was a very dark and negative period for Ukraine. Many people still felt like Ukraine is the part of Russia or Ukraine is the part of the Soviet Union. And perhaps even before the start of this war, many people in the European Union, on other continents, could not see the difference between Ukraine and Belarus or Ukraine and Russia. And this is a huge problem and tragedy. But at the same time, this war has shown the true face of Ukraine and the true face of Putin's regime. And many people learned a lot about what is Ukraine and how different it is from the Soviet Republic. Our independence began in 1991, but at the same time, we are a very, very old country. And we had long periods of independence and long periods of occupation. There are facts that people often associate with Ukraine, like war today or Chernobyl back in 1986 and later. These are Ukrainian tragedies, and to tell you the truth, we don't want to be associated just with such dark periods of our life, and there are lots of positive things that we can give the world, we have already given to the world, and these associations can be different. I dream of the day when it is safe to come to Ukraine and discover it, and of course I invite all of you, but only after we win, because there will be lots of important historical, natural and modern things for you to see. During the Soviet period that lasted many decades for Ukraine, we have lost 16 million Ukrainians. The population dropped. We lost 16 million people approximately due to Stalin's terror, due to Holodomor, which was a genocide against Ukrainians created in 1932-33, and also there were minor Holodomors too. This was an artificial famine that led to the deaths of the millions. It was organized by Stalin's communist regime. Also deportations, when many Ukrainians were taken away to depressive and cold regions of Russia to rebuild that regions and to change the Ukrainian identity. The policy of Russification was a serious tragedy, and many people lost the ability to speak their own native language. Ukrainian was forbidden, it was not spoken at the universities, books were not printed in it. It was more described as a poetic language for singing or for telling the poems, but not something serious, not for professional, official communication or something. So generations of Ukrainians lived with the idea that the language is not worth learning. Ukraine, if you feel like Ukrainian, you are a nationalist or you're a bad person. And for Russians, everyone who is not Russian is a nationalist. And that is a serious problem which demonstrates poisonous ideological things that live in their society for decades. When we gained our independence in 1991, I will tell you perhaps this was not a real independence. Why? Because Americans like to say one phrase that I totally understand right now. Freedom is not for free. And it is only today that we fight for our freedom against our eternal enemy. And that is not just Russia. That is hatred, darkness, poverty, authoritarianism, and all that evil that often comes from our northern neighbor who claims to be Big Brother. I believe there are no big or small brothers among nations and peoples, and it is totally wrong to treat countries and their influence based on their size. Because there are other more important things, experiences, strengths, culture, innovation that can come from all over the world. And perhaps this is one of the most important concepts that is supported in the European Union and so much valued in my country, Ukraine. That is equality. Equality among all the people, among all the different identities and various demonstrations of yourself. And this is one of the things that we are fighting for. During this war, we have felt extremely united. You know, the very first days were very decisive. No one is ready to hide in bomb shelters. I've never had that experience, to listen to air raid sirens, to learn about the destructions of the universities you've studied at, to watch hospitals attacked and children killed at schools. This is something you can never be prepared for, and these are huge traumas that we receive daily. But what does it mean to be a strong nation when all of these problems and all of these tragedies, they do not destroy us, they make us united? And Putin, with his war in Ukraine, reached just the contrary to what he wanted. He finally united all of us, united us against evil, united us against disrespect, hatred, violence. And he united us not only inside Ukraine, but also with our allies from all over the world. I know that Portugal is a special country for Ukraine because many Ukrainians live in Portugal for decades and are a visible part of the Portuguese society. Today, your country helps us a lot, and we are very grateful for that. Because once again, during these very first days, when Putin believed blitzkrieg is possible, and soon Ukraine will change forever, many strong politicians, many strong countries observed. And these couple of days were important to show the world that we are not going to give up. This is the war for our existence, but at the same time, this is the war for democracy, freedom, and normality in the world. And then we felt this support. We felt that we are not alone. We received weapons, trainings, and we became stronger and more grateful. And you know, very often in Ukrainian society, I hear phrases like that: after we win, we're going to help others. We're going to share our experience. We are going to support and guarantee freedom and guarantee peace. And there are so many things that we want to give back to the world for the support that you give us. And I do believe that we will win this war. Actually, I'm convinced that we have already won this war on the very first day it began, when we demonstrated we're not going to give up and we are going to protect the world against Putin's regime. Many are afraid whether the Third World War is possible. And of course, there are different answers, and this question influences many decisions. But I can honestly tell you that from what we Ukrainians believe, Putin has already started this war in his head when he ignored all international laws, all the rules of war, by attacking hospitals, civilians, and just yesterday, drone kamikaze destroyed a house in which a couple and a pregnant woman, 6 months pregnant woman, and their cat died. So this is not a war for resources. This is not a war for, political influence. This is a war between good and evil, black and white, and it's very, very obvious. And I think it's extremely important to stop Putin and his regime, because if he is not stopped, he will continue to other countries. And there are lots of phrases of their diplomats when they speak what countries belong to their sphere of influence, which is a very unhealthy concept. What kind of sphere of influence? What is that, right? And his ideas, they go totally against the ideas of the European Union and the ideas of the free world. And we Ukrainians, for centuries, belong to the European family. And despite the facts of occupation by Russian Empire, by Soviet Union, and now by Russia, our eternal enemy, as you see, we continue fighting for democracy, freedom, equality, protecting diversity. And that's why I think it's impossible to win us or to change our direction. There is a question that I ask foreign friends: what associations you have with Ukraine? And often this is Chernobyl, this is war, or sometimes something positive like famous boxers, Klitschko brothers, or good soccer players. And I do hope that in the years to come, you will have more and more positive associations with Ukraine. You will learn more about our achievements and the things that we can be useful to the world. Because I'm convinced that the European Union is very much needed in Ukraine, and Ukraine is also very much needed in the European Union. Because today we are fighting for freedom, equality, right to speak, right to live the life you want, freedom to travel, freedom to enjoy cultural, linguistic diversity. And we feel the support that you give us. And for Ukrainians, perhaps our joining of the European Union will be similar to a return to a family. When we received the candidacy for the European Union on the 23rd of June this year, we were very much inspired. We do understand this is going to be a long process, and many reforms are to be done, and they are very difficult to conduct during active war in your country. Many things must be changed, and the infrastructure must be rebuilt, and perhaps not all the countries, or especially not all the politicians of all the countries, are ready to see Ukraine with its problems and its huge size, because we are the largest country in Europe, and we have perhaps today the largest problems in Europe because of Russian war in Ukraine. But at the same time, I believe it was a very symbolic gesture, and that demonstrated that the support is mutual. Ukraine was fighting for its European choice starting 2014. After Maidan revolution, when pro-Russian President Yanukovych escaped from Ukraine and Russia annexed Crimea and Donbass, and this war actually started, because it did not start on the 24th of February. It is just a new direction, a new size of war, a full-scale war that started in February. And before that, we had a war that lasted for 8 years, but it was just localized in the eastern part of Ukraine with the annexation of Crimea. So for us, becoming a candidate to the European Union is a very important and symbolic step. Even if it takes us long and much effort will be needed, I want to demonstrate you the things that prove that we are a part of the EU cultural, ideological sphere. There are lots of things that we consider the pillars of the European Union, like freedom, and this is something we fight for in Ukraine. And it is not something that we started valuing just in the 90s when we received independence. For centuries, we have been a strong and big country. For example, maybe you have heard about Kiev Rus, which was one of the most influential countries of the medieval Europe. And we had lots of connections with other countries and, this family connections. And it was a very developed country with a high level of literacy and pretty democratic as for medieval times standards. For example, Ukrainian women enjoyed lots of rights even in Kiev Rus times, and that's why Ukrainian women are very active even now. And in the Ukrainian armed forces, we have lots of women, which makes our army really different from the army of Russians, where there is still Dedovshchina, disrespect of the older soldiers to the younger soldiers, and disrespect based on gender and other things. So we were always for equality, and I think that our society is based on the principle of equality combined with diversity. Ukraine has always been open to different cultures. We were trying to protect the languages of the indigenous people. For example, Crimean Tatars who lived on the territory of Crimea and then were deported by Stalin's regime. And after the fall of the Soviet Union, many families returned back to Crimea. And now, once again, they had to leave it. They had to leave their homes because of the Russian occupation of the Crimea and the persecution of Crimean Tatars as bearers of a different identity. And in Russia, they don't like diversity. They disrespect cultural differences, and they Russify, and Russify. The reason that in so many cities of Ukraine you could hear Russian language was the fact that during Soviet times, Russian was the main official language, and it was the language of education, the language of official communication, the language of media, and languages of other nationalities like Ukrainian or Belarusian were limited. And slowly People changed their identity and people changed their linguistic identity. People lost the connection with their cultural heritage. And for example, the situation in Belarus is really tragic. Approximately 2-3% of people speak Belarus language, so we may say it is almost disappeared. In Ukraine, the situation is better, and we have lots of speakers of Ukrainian language, and now many people switch to Ukrainian because they don't want to speak one language with the aggressor. But there are lots of evidence how our culture, our language, our identity was damaged by the Soviet Union, by Russian Empire, and today by Putin's regime. They target lots of objects, for example, of cultural heritage. And one of the stories that impressed me a lot was the destruction of an archive in Chernihiv, which is the city on the north of Ukraine. And this archive was dedicated to the materials on the victims of the Stalin's regime. And it could help families to find their relatives that were arrested in the 30s, in the 40s, find their graves, for example, discover their family history. And this archive was blown up by a Russian bomb, and all the materials disappeared. They were destroyed. And this archive was not digitized. And I felt really sorry for that, because all these materials were lost. And this is one more thing that proves how digitization is important. My organization works in the sphere of cultural heritage preservation and promotion, and we were active participants of various EU programs on digitization. We try to introduce EU standards, we try to educate similar NGOs on various techniques and tools that can be used to digitize cultural objects. But before this war, we were focused on innovation, on the opportunities that digitization gives, like you can use it in various research projects for educational purposes, on your mobile applications, you can create virtual reality or whatever. So we were more focused on education, research, innovation, entertainment. But now, Russia has destroyed hundreds of cultural objects on the territory of Ukraine, museums, churches, historical buildings in the center of our cities, and all of them are lost. And now we realize that digitization of cultural heritage objects is not just about innovation, sustainability, education, it's about survival. And there are applications, and I have one even on my phone, created by specialists all over the world that help you to scan, even if you are like a person that is really far away from IT or cultural heritage. But these applications allow you to scan an architectural object, for example, to create its 3D model and to save it, so that when it is destroyed, and in Ukraine it is our harsh reality, people later will be able to rebuild it. So we receive this totally different understanding of the basic concepts that European Union is operating on. There are many beautiful things that we talk about, like, once again, freedom, democracy, and innovation, but we live and we fight for the things right now in this online regime in Ukraine. And I know that the program you are participants of is dedicated to many important ideas, among which is, for example, climate neutrality and the protection of the environment. And Ukraine is a country that went through a very traumatic environmental experience. In 1986, we had a catastrophe on Chernobyl. Many people are still influenced by it because this was really bad. People had to leave their houses, and huge territories forbidden for entrance. Then health issues, many people died while fighting the fire on the Chernobyl station. And now, can you imagine how we feel when Russians target some of our nuclear power stations, like the one in Zaporizhia? They have brought weapons there. They shoot on the territory of these nuclear power stations. And for example, the Zaporizhia power station is 6 times larger than Chernobyl. So if anything happens, this will be 6 times worse than Chernobyl. Another thing which demonstrates total irresponsibility of Russians is the fact that it will not only influence Ukraine, it has a potential to destroy the huge ecological system of Europe. It will influence Russia. It will influence other countries. And of course, it will influence Ukraine. And it is so unbelievable that in the 21st century, having learned so much from the history lessons of the First World War, the Second World War, Putin's regime threatens the world, either with nuclear bombs or with firing on the nuclear power stations. And in our Ukrainian news, on Facebook or everywhere, you can come across like normal news, the ones that you read every day, living in a normal world. And then you will come across like 10 rules of how to behave during a nuclear explosion. And our kids at school are introduced to that. I work as a university teacher, and we combine offline and online formats. But almost daily, our lectures are interrupted by the air raid alarms, and we have either to hide in a bomb shelter or to stop our classes online, and then students escape and go into the underground. And it influences us a lot. Even if you don't have an explosion, you're lucky to live in a semi-dangerous zone. You cannot continue and live your life normally. And there are lots of things that you have to learn how to behave in case of this danger. And it's so weird how quickly you can adapt to that. But it is also weird because people don't have to get used to that. And one of the requests, perhaps, that Ukrainians have is that we don't want the world to get used to war in Ukraine, because it is not normal. It is not normal that our children have to carry bags with pills, water, medications to school every day in case of emergency, in case of something bad happening to school or to the city, so they can hide in the shelters and they will have provision for a day or two. This happens daily. And there are other spheres of life that are hugely influenced by this war, even if it is not visible on the surface. I'm not even saying about the people who live in hot zones, who live under constant Russian missile attacks, close to Russian troops, Russian tanks, and they go through so many things psychologically, physically, and also this continuous environmental damage that they create by the destruction of various infrastructure objects or by cutting down Ukrainian forests. Many of the territories that were occupied now lack thousands of trees because they were cut down and taken away to Russia or for the building of some military bases, something we totally do not need. So this war in Ukraine is not just the war between Ukraine and Russia. It is the war between violence and normality, between civilized world that cares about climate, that cares about confident and comfortable coexistence, cohabitation, and that doesn't care about anything. You know, there is a question I cannot answer myself, like, Russia is the largest country in the world. They have huge territories. Why do they need more territories? They did not manage to make an order in their own villages and cities that seem very depressive, especially far away from Moscow and St. Petersburg, but they still need more lands. They fight for Ukraine, they threaten the Baltic countries, Poland and others, not trying to build normal society, not trying to protect their own environment, not caring about their environment, because much of Russia's economy is based on dig and sell principles, and the arguments that they use for the manipulation and blackmailing the world are actually their natural resources, but they are not connected with the work of the society. These are just given by God resources that they don't use wisely. They actually don't care much about the nature and environment of Russia. So there are lots of things that we have to stand against and stand for at the same time. But there are questions that I want to ask you, and I will answer them myself. And the question number one will be, why do you think Ukraine needs to join the European Union? And once again, I will say this is an extremely important symbolic gesture that will help us to develop our standards, to conduct the reforms that are much needed, because corruption and other problems were imported for decades from Russia, and after the collapse of the USSR, there are lots of different unbelievable things happened with private property and other things back in 90s, and now we're trying to cure ourselves of that. And I'm sure we will be able to become more transparent and more healthy, because in Ukraine we have a perfect civil society I'm very much proud of, and our people take good care in controlling our politicians. We do not worship them as in Russia. We do not keep dictators for decades. We do protest if we feel that our elections are falsified, or if we feel that politicians do not conduct the will of Ukrainian people. And I'm proud of that, and I'm sure if you have doubts about corruption or other problems that can come to the European Union with Ukraine, don't worry, because our civil society is very active. We demonstrate lots of unusual things like volunteering, huge volunteering movement that supplies our army with the best needed weapons, defense, medication, and all of that. This is a phenomenon that must be studied in future. And the same is about our desire to have normal courts, to have normal police, to have normal hospitals and schools. And there are lots of positive changes, and definitely if you compare Ukrainian corruption to Russian, you will see a huge gap. And we are definitely healthier, despite this propaganda, Russian propaganda, that they try to frighten the world with, that Ukraine is a very problematic country. The second question that I want to ask is why the European Union may need Ukraine. I think we are also important, because today we demonstrate the real fight for the core values of the European Union, like freedom, equality, diversity, and I hope that your country and other countries of the European Union will never experience what war is. And when you forget about that, you forget many traumas, many pains, and it is supposed to be like that in the world, in the normal world. But at the same time, it seems like this normality, freedom, a possibility to study, a possibility to travel, a possibility to eat what you want, to say what you want, is something that will always be with you. And in Ukraine, we realized, no, freedom is not taken for granted. You have to protect it. Well, if you have a neighbor like Russia. And today we fight for that freedom. We fight for democracy. And we are supported by the European Union, by the countries of the world. And I believe this is a global war. It sounds frightening, but at the same time, it demonstrates us that we cannot relax. and living in healthy societies, we still have to be constantly aware that something bad and evil can come. It can come directly, as Russia did by directly attacking Ukraine, or it can come in various disguises. And you know, Russians finance lots of negative movements that work in different countries, and they simply like creating problems in the political sphere, in the economical sphere, by making countries weaker, by sometimes making the European Union weaker. Why do they need it? It is an old Soviet practice, and lots of Soviet myths, they still fuel Russian military machine. They never look inside their country, trying to find some problems inside their society, trying to fix their own problems. They prefer to look for enemies outside, to describe West as rotting, to focus on various problems that exist all over the world, not noticing huge, tremendous problems inside their society, inside their economy, their culture, and all the other spheres of Russian life. So I believe that Ukrainians demonstrate that they fight, they lose their lives for the things that are the pillars of the European Union. So I do think that we are very much a part of the EU. And it has always been like that. It has always caused us problems and tragedies because Russia does not accept our civilizational choice. But it is not the decision of this year. It is not the decision of 10 years. It is the decision of centuries. And our history, starting from Cossacks, who were unique military country protecting Europe from Tatars, participating in various European military missions, and finishing with today's Ukraine, demonstrate the desire to live freely, to be able to make your own choices and your own mistakes, and to value and celebrate diversity. And apart from these ideological things, there are lots of other more material aspects that Ukraine can give to the world. We, as I have already mentioned, we are the largest country in Europe that is famous for its agriculture, its heavier construction sphere, its IT sphere that is growing really fast. We have created the largest plane, Mriya, that was destroyed by Russians at the very beginning of this war. And it was very symbolic because in Ukrainian, Mriya means the dream. And this plane was used to deliver medications, for example, during the COVID pandemics. And it worked globally. And they destroyed it because they destroy everything useful, beautiful. But we will rebuild the plane and we will continue helping the world as the world helps us. Ukrainians are a very grateful nation. I have already spoken to you about digitization and the totally new understanding it received in Ukraine. And I can tell you that President Zelensky, who is very much respected all over the world for his bravery right now, and he was a surprise for me. I did not expect him to be such a hero, and I'm really proud that he stayed in the country and he talked with so many world leaders and managed to attract the support of the world. But his party were also initiators of a serious digital shift in Ukrainian life. And for example, we have an application on our mobile phones that is known as DIA. And by the way, many Ukrainians who now live in the European Union, they lack this level of digital freedom that they have in Ukraine. And this application DIA, mobile application DIA, allows to do lots of important things without visiting various bureaucratic organizations. Bureaucracy is a problem all over the world, and sometimes when you need to update your COVID certificate, for example, you have to stand in a queue. And this DIA application, it allows to work with various documents, starting with child registration and finishing with COVID certification, pension, I don't know, anything you can think about, paying your taxes or even starting your small business. You can do it online. And we all liked it a lot. We were testing it for 2 years, and war, once again, gave a totally different value to this application. Why? Many people lost their houses, lost their flats. It's good that they managed to save their lives. You know, we all have our go-to bag where we put medication, warm clothes, things that we might need for a day or two when we go to bomb shelters. Because every day your flat, your house can be destroyed. It's good if you were able to take your documents with you, but sometimes people lose everything. And then this digital application allows them to restore documents and to use all the rights of the citizen without any problems. And this is something perhaps the developers of the application did not expect to go through with this application when they were designing it. It was more focused on comfort, but today it is about saving personal data, identities, and simplifying the life of those people who have already lost almost everything. And I see that this optimism that we have, being able to ruin Putin's plans, to stop his idea of blitzkrieg, being able to feel the support of our allies, there are lots of good ideas, good startups that appear, and there are even cafes that are open on the streets of my city that is semi-safe by people who fled war from other regions of Ukraine. There are various digital applications like those that help you to scan or those to help you to save your data, and other things are developed daily. And I believe that with all that will to live peacefully, to stand for the protection of democracy and peace in the world, with all these ideas, because, you know, troubles, they always fuel creativity. With all these ideas, Ukraine can be useful to the European Union. And we are very grateful that it seems like you are ready to accept us in the European family. It is a great honor for me to address you, the participants of the EUbyLakes project, of the EU for Citizens program. And it's especially warm because I come from Volyn, and that is the region of 200 lakes, as we say. And I hope that in a very near future, it will be possible for you to come and enjoy the beauty of Ukrainian nature and discuss the lessons that we have learned from this war in a happy and peaceful atmosphere. Once again, I want to thank the people of the European Union and the people of Portugal for the support and understanding that you demonstrate daily as this awful war continues. But we will definitely win, and we will win together. Obrigada.